Growing up, I don't think I realized how dark some of these kids movies could be.
Yeah, okay.
But one of the darkest kids movie scenes is in Tarzan.
I think I know what you're talking about. Is it the beginning? The tiger kills Tarzan's parents?
Nah, it involves somebody getting hung.
No way.
Yeah, bro.
Tarzan?
Yes, bro.
I don't remember this.
Clayton's death. Clayton is the main villain in the movie.
Okay, let me see, bro. I don't really remember how the ending was. Oh, fuck.
Look at the shadow. Did you see the shadow?
No, go back. Oh, I never even noticed that, bro. I forgot about that scene.
The fact that that was in a kids movie.
But again, even the beginning scene, whenever his parents died too by the tiger, is pretty dark as well.
A 48-year-old woman stepped onto the escalator of a Montreal metro station just as she had done countless times before. It was routine, second nature, until it wasn't. As she ascended, the sharp metal teeth of the escalator snagged the end of her scarf. At first, it was just a gentle tug, so subtle she barely noticed. But then, the pull grew stronger. Before she could react, the scarf tightened around her throat. Panic surged through her. She bent down, frantically clawing at the fabric and losing her balance, trying to rip it free. But as she struggled, her hair became tangled in the merciless machinery also. The escalator never stopped. Its motor kept grinding forward, twisting the scarf tighter and tighter, each passing second squeezing the life out of her. Her desperate gasps faded, her vision darkened. The scarf was no longer a mere accessory, it had become her noose. By the time help arrived, it was too late. She was dead. The escalator had done its work, turning an everyday ride into a scene of silent horror. She never made it to the top and died a terrible and unfortunate death.
This woman used Roblox to instruct a 10-year-old girl on how to murder a 2-year-old infant. This is 36-year-old Tara Sykes, and this story is incredibly disturbing. Tara Sykes' 10-year-old daughter was living with a different family, and she wasn't happy with it. So she got onto the game Roblox and started communicating with her 10-year-old daughter. And eventually these chats turned completely disturbing. Tara communicated with her 10-year-old daughter over Roblox and told her exactly how to kill this 2-month-old baby. At first she told her daughter to drown the baby in a bathtub. Then she told her daughter maybe she could burn the baby to death with scalding hot water. And then eventually she settled on telling her 10-year-old daughter to drop the baby on its head. And sadly, that's exactly what her daughter would go on to do. Tara's daughter picked up the 2-month-old child of the people she was living with, walked over to the kitchen floor, and dropped the baby on its head, attempting to end its life. The 10-year-old girl would later tell authorities that she was horrified of her mother, and she was terrified about what her mother would do to her if she didn't carry out her disturbing instructions. Further investigation also showed that Tara had instructed her 10-year-old daughter to kill the 2 adults that she was living with at the time. She told her daughter to go cut the 2 adults' throats with a kitchen knife while they slept, and then instructed her to douse the bed sheets with aerosol spray and light the house on fire. Now, shockingly, the 10-year-old actually did douse the sheets with spray, but she told authorities she wasn't able to finish the disturbing act. Now, Tara has been charged with a number of different things, but her trial has not been officially started yet, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen in this case, but I do see Tara receiving an extremely long sentence, hopefully life in prison, because this entire thing is just so completely disturbing and messed up. And I really hope that she's never able to see the light of day again.
Horrified witnesses watched him pour petrol over her and then burn her alive. It was September 2024 in Endebess in Kenya. Rebecca Cheptegei was an outstanding athlete and a real role model to young women everywhere. The 33-year-old was not only an incredible mum of 2 beautiful little daughters, but was also a former world champion in mountain running. She was a competitive long-distance and cross-country runner who was extremely dedicated and talented. She was super supportive, not only just to her family and friends, but also complete strangers. She would hear stories of other runners who were struggling to afford things like trainers, and she would just donate money towards them just to help them, give them a little head start. Rebecca had recently competed in the Paris Olympics and was back to being on mum duty alongside her regular training. On the 1st of September, Rebecca had just come back from taking her daughters to church. This was a routine for them. She always took them to church. They really enjoyed it and she loved spending time with them. However, when they came home, she was targeted by her ex-boyfriend, Dixon Marangach. The pair had broken up and were believed to have been in a disagreement regarding a property she'd recently purchased. While the children were inside, the couple were seen by eyewitnesses who were absolutely horrified at the scenes that were unfolding. The pair were arguing outside the house, but then Dixon apparently got more and more heated, and it was obvious he went to grab something. He was then seen pouring liquid all over Rebecca before she could even react. The witnesses later heard that this was petrol. Just seconds later, he set her alight, and Dixon actually set himself on fire in the commotion by accident, and emergency services were called and rushed both of them to hospital. Tragically, although medical staff did all they could for Rebecca, she had such severe burns that it caused multiple organ failure and she passed away just days later. Dixon had far fewer injuries but also died. Due to this senseless and cowardly murder, Rebecca's little daughters will now have to grow up without their amazing mother.
I'm not certain about a lot in life, but one thing I am certain of is how genuinely disturbing this story is, and how you 100% will not sleep tonight because of it. This is a young girl who went missing in Mexico sometime in the 90s, and she was featured on a really popular broadcast called Community Service on Channel 5. This broadcast featured local missing person cases, but once Selena's case popped up, weird things started to happen, causing viewers to panic. What happened to Selena and everything that followed is extremely disturbing, so let's talk about it. So Channel 5 is a Mexican TV station that has been around since the 50s. The channel is aimed at children, with segments airing during commercial breaks on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. And while some might not think anything of it, it's actually pretty disturbing when you find out what exactly they're airing for kids to see. So each night, Channel 5 would often air a broadcast called Community Service, which features real local missing person cases. Every time it came on, it would list a ton of missing people, and usually a lot of information and photos would be attached to each case. The goal was to air this in hopes of finding these missing people and bring them home. This is a great way to spread the word on missing people, but some thought it was a little dark to do this on kids' channels, because after all, they are just kids, and these segments were known to be kind of sinister and bleak. But this was supposedly done on purpose to show young kids how scary the world can actually be, and in a way it was meant to teach them to be safe. This all had good intentions, but in 2001, Channel 5 featured a missing persons case that would unintentionally cause mass panic, even to this day. In 2001, Community Service featured the missing persons case of 18-year-old Selena Delgado Lopez, who disappeared on April 22nd. The year she disappeared has never been proven, although it's suggested that she disappeared sometime in the late 90s. What made this case stand out to viewers was this uncanny, poorly lit photo of Selena, and the fact that there was hardly any information about her disappearance besides her name, age, and where she went missing, which was in Mexico City. This was odd because everyone else that was featured on this broadcast had a lot of information and a ton of photos, but Selena's case didn't have any of that. Channel 5 aired Selena's photo and case for years, but it wasn't long until viewers started noticing something strange. Every time Selena's case and photo came on the TV, viewers started to get really uncomfortable and afraid, citing the nature of her photo as incredibly bizarre. Viewers noted how oddly terrified her photo made them feel, as it was super uncanny. Adding to the mystery surrounding this whole phenomenon is the fact that whenever Selena's photo would be featured, the TV channel would freeze and glitch out for a few minutes before the broadcast would abruptly cut to static. Because of the mass panic and strange coincidences like the TV glitching whenever her photo came on the screen, scary urban legends started to spread surrounding Selena and what really happened to her. Some said that Selena was met with a horrible fate and that her spirit haunted Channel 5 whenever her picture showed up on the screen. Others said that her photo was simply cursed. Some even went so far as to say that Selena was not a real missing person and that her uncanny photo was actually created using AI. And this theory was kind of backed up when people started looking into Selena's case and found no public record of her disappearance. It was around the time of Selena's disappearance and feature on Channel 5 that this photo started going around. It's obviously incredibly disturbing, and at the time, no one knew where it came from. Some pointed out the similarities between Selena's face and this one when lined up over each other, and videos about the glitches viewers would experience began circulating, just like this one.
XHGC Canal 5, al servicio de la comunidad. Pedimos ayuda para localizar a Selene Delgado López, de 18 años, se extravió el 22 de abril en la delegación Álvaro Obregón. Selene Delgado López, se ignora su paradero desde el 28 de mayo del año 2000. Selene Delgado López, de 18 años, se extravió el 22 de abril en la delegación Álvaro Obregón.
Although creepy, this photo is actually just a police sketch of Derek Todd Lee, aka the Baton Rouge Slayer. Derek was a serial killer who between 1998 and 2003 terrorized Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. He killed at least 7 women, and before he was caught, authorities released this composite sketch of him. He was officially arrested and charged for these crimes in 2004, but somehow his composite sketch became associated with Selena's photo, thus fueling these really scary urban legends and stories about her death and disappearance. Like I said earlier, Channel 5 continued to air Selena's case on community service for years after the fact, because no one was able to confirm if she was actually a real missing person. And every time they did, viewers would still feel incredibly afraid and uncomfortable, and their TVs would all glitch. And as the years passed, this disturbing experience would remain a mystery, as would Selena's disappearance. Then in 2010, Channel 5 would begin to post some really disturbing photos and videos on Twitter. This is a video they posted. It's so creepy, and although it wasn't created by them, just reposted, no one knows why they randomly started doing this. Their Twitter account would be totally normal during the day, but every night, usually around 3 a.m., they began posting these disturbing videos, and by morning, they would all be deleted. One of the videos they posted had a caption mentioning Selena, and it is really creepy. When employees at Channel 5 were questioned about this, no one knew anything about it. That, in and of itself, is genuinely so scary to me, but then in 2020, Selena's disappearance and the urban legends surrounding it once again resurfaced, and this became known as the Facebook incident. In 2020, a Facebook page of a woman with the exact same name as Selena popped up. It started gaining some traction because users discovered that they had already been added as her friend, even though no one knew her, and none of them sent her a friend request. To their horror, they also discovered that there was no option to unfriend her either. This led people to believe that her profile was haunted and in some way connected to what happened to Selena. This profile was shared thousands of times, and while it is a little creepy, there was actually a really logical explanation for the entire thing. This profile turned out to just be someone with the same name as Selena, and she had really just changed her privacy settings. She removed the add friend option from her profile, and because her page was blowing up and she had no clue why, she privated her account, which is still there to this day. Although a lot about this story is still a mystery, there are a few theories that could explain what's going on with Channel 5 and Selena's disappearance. Theory number 1 is that Selena is a real missing person, and her lack of information is simply due to the lack of resources back then. There are a lot of missing people in Mexico, especially during that time, so maybe her disappearance was just never followed up on. If that's the case and she is a real missing person, it's extremely sad, and her family deserves answers as to what really happened to her. Cable TV back then wasn't great quality, so that could explain the nature of her photo as well as the glitching and freezing on the channel. It could have really happened, maybe just due to technical issues. Theory number 2 was that Selena is not a real missing person, and it's been suggested that Channel 5 created her to fuel a fake urban legend in order to scare young viewers into being safe. It could be that this is all a hoax to shed some light on how unsafe the world actually is, and it could very well just be a publicity stunt to get people to watch the broadcast. Either that, or Selena's case and photo was created by someone else with the sole intent of scaring people, and Channel 5 didn't do its due diligence to make sure it was real before airing. That's weird to me though, because they continued airing her story for years after the fact. Some people lean more towards this being a hoax by Channel 5 simply because of the Twitter post in 2010 referencing Selena. Whether the story is true or not, it still gives me full body chills. It's now been 24 years since this story surfaced, but it remains a disturbing mystery to this day.
A young boy arrived at a park eager to play basketball on an empty court. He loved having it all to himself, but as he dribbled, another man approached. The stranger, tall and quiet, started shooting around with his own ball, one that was nearly flat. After a few minutes, the man turned to him. "Mind if I use yours?" he asked. The boy hesitated but nodded, and they continued shooting together. Then, out of nowhere, the boy's basketball suddenly went flat. The man gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I've got a spare one in my trunk, go grab it." Something felt off, but the boy didn't want to be rude. Slowly, he walked over to the car, reached for the trunk latch, and lifted it open. His breath was then caught in his throat at what he saw. Inside, covered in dark blood, were severed heads, dozens of them, their lifeless eyes staring back at him. His stomach turned, his vision blurred with terror. Then he heard it, the pounding of footsteps. He spun around just in time to see the man sprinting towards him, arms outstretched. Adrenaline surged through the boy's veins. He turned and ran, his legs moving faster than they ever had before. The man chased him, closing the distance, but the boy was quicker. He tore through the park, never looking back until he reached safety. Shaking, he called the police. When they arrived, they found the man and searched his car. They then found 8 severed heads, each belonging to a missing boy. But there was no bodies. One officer knelt beside the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You were going to be next if you didn't call us."
White House GIF. I don't know if you ever heard about this.
I never heard about the White House gift, but I heard about like GIFs, GIFs,
GIFs,
whatever.
yeah. And I got this from a YouTuber. He's the one that first talked about it, so I want to give him his credits. Lazy Masquerade. It's very, very eerie and disturbing once you know like the backstory to everything. We already know how those scary videos, curse videos were really popular back in the day. They would pop up. We would send them to people. This one wasn't as popular, but it was mostly associated with a video called "Why You Never Became a Dancer."
So that's just the whole video?
A song by a band called White House. The song or whatever had nothing to do with the image it was showing, and the identity of the woman remained unknown for like a really long time. So it wasn't until June of last year that they found out who she really was, and a lot of people thought it was fake until a Reddit user, his name was Lane Campbell 77, ended up posting on his Reddit thread that he found a book that was about a Japanese serial killer. His name was Kiyoshi Akubo. He was one of Japan's most notorious serial killers. He had killed 8 victims, one of them being that girl.
Yo.
And her name was Reiko Takemura. One day he had picked her up, the same thing that he did to everybody else, asked her if she wanted to be a model so he could paint. When in this car, Kiyoshi got the impression that Reiko,
She liked him.
Kiyoshi tried to say that, "Let's go back to like a motel." Reiko was saying, "Do you really think I'm that type of girl?" Later on, they ended up going through this forest road, and he tried to force himself onto her. She obviously slapped him. She tried to run away. He caught up to her. He strangled her to death. The only reason he was caught was because of Reiko's brother. He made it his mission to find Kiyoshi. There was this one night where
The pedophile ring that was uncovered in Jordan, Minnesota today sent shockwaves across America, and in total over a dozen locals have been arrested so far, including local mothers and police officers. Nobody in this small town of approximately 2,700 wanted to believe that this was possible, that their neighbors next door, the friendly couple with kids of their own, could be accused of worshiping the devil during late-night rituals and mechanically molesting children. But this is the reality now of life here in Jordan, Minnesota, where over a dozen local adults have been arrested by local authorities on suspicion that they were involved in an occult-influenced pedophile ring that recruited and used local children to feed their darkest desires and sickest pleasures.
No one wants to believe that evil could potentially touch their hometown. Nobody wants to imagine a world where their friends, neighbors, and even family members could conspire together to harm children in their own backyard. But unfortunately, and tragically, these dark thoughts became an even darker reality in the town of Jordan, Minnesota, in the year 1983. To this very day, local and national authorities refuse to admit that an occult-influenced group of local adults were working with criminals in the small town of Jordan, Minnesota, to pimp out and molest children from the area. But sometimes, reality is stranger than fiction. The story of the Jordan, Minnesota child abuse ring is one of the most disturbing ever told, and it was completely covered up by the United States government. Join us today as we expose these secrets that have remained hidden for over 40 years and investigate claims of murder, child abuse, and Satanism in the small town of Jordan, Minnesota.
I wish I hadn't researched this case, but it's too late now. The information is burned into my brain. A man literally found a deceased teenage girl, and instead of calling the police like a normal human, he did just about the most disgusting, vulgar thing a human could do. Firstly, I'm so sorry I haven't been posting. I've been so unwell, and as you can hear, I'm still a little bit manly, but we're gonna give it a go today. I've finally kind of got my voice back, so I'm back and I apologize. Amber Niven and Connor Gibson were siblings who had quite a traumatic upbringing. Amber was 2 years younger than Connor, and the pair honestly saw things that no children should ever have seen. Their mum was a victim of DV at the hands of their dad, and he would regularly beat her up in front of the children. At one point, one of the beatings was so bad that she actually was rendered unconscious. Things got so bad in 2008 that thankfully social services had to intervene. This was after severe child neglect caused the children to lose so much weight that they were horrifically malnourished. This led both of these children to crime. They actually had to go out and steal food in order to just survive. Now, like I said, social services did intervene and they removed the children from the biological parents and placed them into foster care. This was with a couple in South Lanarkshire, and it finally seemed like the children were in a stable home. Amber ended up changing her surname to Niven in an attempt for kind of like a fresh start, but Connor decided to keep Gibson. Now, I suppose you might think that because these siblings had been through so much together, it might have actually brought them really close together and they would be kind of like an unstoppable unit. But actually the opposite happened. They kind of grew further and further apart. Now, despite what she'd been through, Amber was actually still really, really positive. She was a lovely girl. She loved the band Little Mix and was a loving, supportive friend to all who knew her. Her foster family said she kept us on our toes and had the most amazing outlook on life considering the suffering she'd experienced. But unfortunately, the suffering was not going to end there. Although Amber seemed to be adjusting to her new life quite well, Connor was a different story. He was being extremely violent and lashing out at school, and even making like disturbing threats to kill other students. Now, in June 2021, when I believe Amber was either 15 or 16 years old, she went to a house in Bothwell with a few people, just as teenagers do. I definitely did that all the time when I was younger. However, at some point during the evening, unfortunately while Amber was asleep, a 20-year-old called Jamie Stars did something horrific. He assaulted and arred her. Now, shockingly, this wasn't his first attack, and he'd also arred another teenage girl in the area a month prior. Now, thankfully, Amber actually did report this, even though it must have been so nerve-wracking to do, especially at such a young age. It's hard enough for grown women to report SAs and Rs, so fair play to Amber for actually having the guts to do this. She said to police, "The reason I think I was arred was that I woke up in a bed with no clothes on my bottom half, with a boy I had only met, naked under the covers." She said, "I can't remember hugging him or kissing him at all." Other victim also reported the attack, and ultimately Jamie was put on the S offenders register and was given 10.5 years in prison. Unfortunately though, Amber would be murdered by someone else before she managed to see her attacker put behind bars. In November that year, Amber met up with Connor and thankfully did actually tell people that this was what she was intending to do, so her friends were aware of who she was with that night. The pair even took a selfie together, but things would quickly turn from siblings just catching up to cold-blooded murder. The pair were actually captured on CCTV that night walking in one direction, but a mere 2 hours later, Connor was then captured walking alone back the opposite way. So where had Amber gone? Connor was then tracked by cameras from Cadstow Bridge to the Blue Triangle, where he arrived just before midnight. CCTV then caught him having changed clothes, leaving his accommodation at 20 past midnight. He was then seen walking towards the bin area and could be seen carrying a bag with items inside. Days later, a horrific discovery was made. A local man in his 40s called Stephen Corrigan found poor Amber's lifeless body. Now, this should be the end of the tale. It should be Stephen ringing police, telling them this horrific finding, and then Amber's body being recovered. But things get far more sinister. Stephen saw her dead body took her lifeless corpse, SA'd it, and dragged it into the bushes. His DNA was literally all over this poor girl's body, proving that he had abused her corpse. On the 28th of November, her body was finally recovered by police, and the evidence officers found was sickening. Amber had been lured by her brother to a remote area where he AR'd her and then murdered her. She had severe blunt force trauma, a broken nose, and had been strangled to death. Police found blood-stained clothing in a wheelie bin at Connor's accommodation. This poor girl had not only been murdered by her own brother after the pair had survived such absolutely horrific abuse growing up, and her then being a victim of a horrific S attack too, but a random member of the public, upon finding her dead body, was still not satisfied with letting Amber rest and SA'd her. Connor was ultimately jailed for life, and Stephen Corrigan was given just 9 years.
One thing that I will never understand but will always creep me out is how someone completely disappears under mysterious circumstances, yet they're found dead weeks later in an area that had already been thoroughly searched. Or when they're seen entering an establishment, yet no one ever sees them leave, but somehow they end up dead. That's what happened to 24-year-old Tommy Booth, and his disappearance and death really keeps me up at night, so let's talk about it. Tommy Booth was a contractor who mysteriously disappeared on January 19th, 2008. That night, he and a group of his friends went to Bootlegger's Bar in Woodland, Pennsylvania to celebrate one of them turning 21. This specific bar wasn't one that Tommy had gone to before because it was kind of far away from his house, and Tommy had epilepsy and was on medication for it, so he usually didn't drive further than he needed to, especially in an area that he wasn't familiar with. But with his friend turning 21 and all of his friends being together to celebrate, Tommy thought this would be fun to join, so one of his friends came to pick him up and off they went to Bootlegger's. In 2008, Bootlegger's was in this strip mall in Woodland, and from what I can find, it was pretty popular. The night started off great, and everyone seemed to be having a good time, but at some point, Tommy became separated from his friends. At 1:25 a.m., a fight took place outside of the bar, which caused the majority of Tommy's friends and other people at the bar to go outside and see what was going on. About 10 minutes later, the friend who was supposed to drive Tommy home went back inside the bar to try and find him so that they could leave, but Tommy was nowhere to be found. This friend looked for about 30 minutes, but when he still couldn't find him, he thought Tommy may have just met a girl and went home with her instead. So the friend ended up leaving without him. When Tommy no-called no-showed the next few days at work, which was extremely out of character for him, and when he failed to answer texts and calls from his friends and family, that's when they knew something was horribly wrong. They ended up reporting him missing to the Ridley Township Police Department, and authorities kicked off the investigation by going back to the place where Tommy was last seen, the Bootlegger's Bar. Nobody at the bar that night had seen anything suspicious, so they started combing through the surveillance footage from all of the nearby businesses, and luckily they did spot Tommy, but this sighting is really strange. So surveillance footage captured him entering the bar that night, but he was never seen leaving. It was like he entered and then just completely disappeared inside the bar somehow. A massive search for Tommy took place, and the main focus was the bar obviously, but all of the surrounding areas as well. This included Ridley Creek, which was right behind the bar and strip mall, but absolutely nothing was found, and it was truly like Tommy just vanished into thin air. But then, 2 weeks later, Tommy's body would be found, and the circumstances surrounding how and where he was found are really disturbing. Tommy was found face down in Ridley Creek, right behind the bar where he went missing. What's odd is that he was found in an area that had already been previously searched multiple times, as it was literally right behind the bar. He was found face down in about 2 inches of water, and according to authorities, there were no signs of foul play or trauma to his body. Police say the reason it took so long to find him is because the creek had frozen over, partially hiding his body from the searchers. But the water hadn't frozen for the first few days after Tommy disappeared, and it had melted a day or two before he was eventually found. What's incredibly strange is the condition of his body upon discovery. When Tommy was found, his body was in full rigor mortis, and for those curious, rigor mortis sets in about 10 hours after his death and dissipates within 36. Originally, the police's theory was that Tommy got too intoxicated, left the bar somehow without being seen on surveillance, and then accidentally fell into the creek and drowned the night he disappeared. But since his body was in full rigor mortis 14 days after going missing, it means he likely had only been dead for about 36 hours at the time he was found. So the big question was, where was he the rest of the 2 weeks he was missing? Because he surely wasn't in the water that entire time, and adding to this is the fact that his body wasn't really even decomposed, which it typically would be if he had really been dead for the entire 2 weeks. If Tommy had really been deceased and in the water for the full 2 weeks before being found, his body would have had excessive bloating, skin slippage, and it sure would be severely decomposed, but he wasn't, like, at all. Authorities also found that he had fixed lividity on the backside of his body, suggesting that when he died, he was laying on his back for a substantial period of time. If he had really been in the water for 2 weeks, the condition of his body would have been a lot different, and there was no way that he could have been on his back on a hard surface since he was found face down floating in a creek. But also, there's just no way that rigor mortis would remain in the body for 14 days. Like, that's just unheard of. Adding to the mystery surrounding Tommy's death was the way his body was found. It looked like it had been staged. 3 sticks were deliberately placed around his body, and on top of that, it looked as if he had been dragged through the sand and mud by his legs into the creek due to the way his feet were placed. It wasn't a natural position by any means, and police actually found drag marks as well as shoe prints on both sides of his body and above his head. The marks in the soil were going upstream against the current, which is also odd. The autopsy again showed no signs of trauma to his body, and Tommy's death was officially ruled as a probable drowning. Even though the time of death and the condition of Tommy's body didn't add up to the police's theory that he just accidentally drowned the night he went missing, police said no foul play was involved, and they closed his case in 2008. But here's where this case takes a strange turn. So although the police found no evidence of foul play, they did find something sinister at Tommy's death site that made them a little weary and not completely sure. 30 feet from the creek where Tommy died was a freshly painted smiley face on the wall of the bar where he went missing. And you probably know where this is heading next, but now a group of retired detectives have been working on this case trying to get it reopened as a homicide because they believe that Tommy's death could be connected to the smiley face killings. I just recently talked about this in another video, but the smiley face killings consist of the deaths of over 40 young men who mysteriously drowned over the span of 11 states. These detectives believe that these drownings are carried out by an organized group of serial killers who target college-aged men, dumping their bodies into local waterways. They then leave behind a smiley face at their death sites, which is eerily similar to what happened to Tommy. I do need to go on record again and say that the smiley face killers are just a theory and have never been proven to be real. But most of the alleged smiley face victims are killed close to a college, are usually unknowingly given a date rape drug like GHB, and almost all of the victims have phones that are never recovered, even when the rest of their belongings are. So the bar that Tommy was at that night is within 4 minutes of Whittier University, and although the toxicology report came back with nothing in his system, some believe that he could have been drugged with something like GHB. I found that GHB typically only stays in your system 12 hours after it's ingested. I could be wrong since I'm not a doctor, but that's what I was able to find online. So it would make sense that nothing showed up in his system 2 weeks later, and Tommy didn't have that much to drink the night he disappeared. So it's just so unlikely that he was too intoxicated and just accidentally fell into the creek. Another thing linking him to the smiley face killings is the fact that his wallet and all of his money was on him when he was found. But the only thing missing that still hasn't been found to this day is his cell phone. And then the very obvious connection is the freshly painted smiley face found right next to Tommy on the bar where he disappeared from. So these investigators met with a crime scene reconstruction specialist who put together a CGI model of where Tommy was found. And from that, it was determined to have been unlikely for him to have just fallen into the creek, as there was a lot of brush and other obstacles in the way. They then had Tommy's autopsy looked at by another pathologist who confirmed that his death was highly suspicious of foul play just based on the condition of his body. He too confirmed that it is impossible for rigor mortis to still be detected 14 days after dying. And because of this, they all believe that Tommy was killed shortly before being found, and that his body was deliberately placed in the creek. This would make sense considering the area was searched multiple times before he was found, and he was clearly not there. Tommy's family and those in the town don't believe that this was just an accident. What's confusing to them is that there is zero record of him leaving the bar that night. Some suggest that he may have left the bar via the back door, and that could possibly be true, but it just doesn't make sense to me. Like I said earlier, Bootlegger's bar at this point in time was located in a strip mall, so no one outside of the bar employees would have used the back door to exit the building, because it wouldn't take you to anything. All of the cars in the parking lot were in the front of the building, so I guess the only logical explanation is that he did use the back door to leave since he wasn't caught on camera. But the main question is, how did he get access to that door? And why did he choose to go that route instead of just leaving out the front door like everyone else? Whether or not Tommy was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was met with foul play that way, or if he was in fact a victim of the smiley face killers, I think we can all agree that this was no accident, and something really sinister happened to him that night. But it's now been 17 years, and whatever happened to Tommy that night remains a mystery.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
YouTuber was murdered by her own father in an honor killing. Tiba al-Ali was originally from Iraq but moved to Turkey in 2017 at the age of 17 and has lived there for the past 6 years with her boyfriend. While she lived in Turkey, she began a YouTube channel and blogged her life and managed to gain around 34,000 subscribers. But even though Tiba seemed to love her new life, her father back in Iraq was not too happy with her decision to leave and not come back. And on January 2023, she went back to Iraq to attend an event and see some of her family, but while she was there, her father kidnapped her, drugged her, and then strangled her in her sleep. He later said that he did this to wash away the shame she had brought to the family. He eventually turned himself in, but apparently he won't be serving much time in prison. And this is because the penal code in Iraq allows judges to impose lenient sentences on people who kill for honorable motives.
Okay, so Kanye West might actually be a clone. Okay, so we all know how Kanye has been in the news for a while now, but not too long ago, he disappeared for a while and came back looking completely different. Just look at this photo. He looks like two different people. He really doesn't even look like Kanye anymore. Kanye also said if he ever disappeared and came back and was acting different, it's not him, and that's exactly what happened. How could somebody be everywhere to nowhere so quickly? It's all a little too sketchy, and here's the video of Kanye saying if I disappear and come back, it's not me.
Yeah. What have you got to say to people that are trying to cancel you? You can't cancel him. I'm here. That's right. We're here doing a big. We ain't going nowhere, baby. We've been here for years. If I ever went anywhere, we know why. You understand what I'm saying? So we here. Exactly. Kanye, any words on Bitcoin? They get paparazzi. Let's get bodyguard.
I killed my great-grandmother for $155 when I was only 13. I'm Antonio A. Barbeau, and with my friend Nathan Pape, we plan to kill my great-grandmother in order to steal her money. I asked my mother to drop my friend and me off at my great-grandmother's like every weekend, but this weekend my intentions were different and I had brought an axe. When we arrived, we tried to enter quietly, but she saw us, so we acted normally and she invited us into her home. Once inside, without hesitation, the moment she turned around, I hit her 27 times with an axe. She tried to defend herself as best she could, but as she was old, she didn't have enough strength and didn't succeed. Once finished, we left her body in the garage and stole jewelry and money to buy drugs and pizza. But unfortunately, 2 days later, my grandmother found her mother's body in the garage. It didn't take them long to deduce that it was us, so they arrested us and sentenced us to life imprisonment. Tell me, would you do something like that for money?
I rage quitted at a professional esports tournament and shot 2 people to death. I'm David Katz, and here's my story. I was a 24-year-old professional Madden player from Baltimore, Massachusetts. I was extremely good, and in August of 2018, I went on a trip to Jacksonville for a tournament. In 2017, I embarked on a professional playing career, and over the course of the next 3 years, I amassed a substantial fortune of $10,000. The Jacksonville tournament commenced in the morning, and unfortunately, things didn't unfold favorably for me this time. I played a few matches and lost every single one of them. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't used to performing so poorly. I was eliminated from the tournament and had no chance of winning. Fueled by anger, I declined to shake hands with the other competitors and decided to leave. I grabbed one of my handguns that I had taken with me to Jacksonville and walked back to the venue. I was sick of losing, especially as the other players seemed to revel in mocking me, intensifying my anger. I decided to enter the building and opened fire on everyone in there. When it was all said and done, I had killed 2 people and injured 10 others. I then put the gun to my head and took my own life.
This man pushed his pregnant wife off a cliff and it was all caught on camera. 41-year-old Hakan and his pregnant wife, 32-year-old Semra, went to Butterfly Valley in Muğla, southern Turkey, where he took her to the top of the cliff and then he pushed her off. Semra, who was 7 months pregnant, fell 1,000 feet and instantly passed away. But it's been said that Hakan pressured Semra to climb to the top of the cliff even though he knew she was terrified of heights. They took a bunch of photos while they were up there, but little did she know what
what her husband was about to do. Luckily, there was a family on that cliff at the same time, and they were filming the view and happened to catch Hakan and Semra and thought Hakan's demeanor was a little strange. After Semra fell, Hakan asked the stranger to help him look for her, and he claimed that she fell on her own. But this stranger said that Hakan looked too calm and like he didn't really care. Hakan's motive was to receive his wife's $25,000 life insurance payout, which he claimed right after her death. He also tried to use the defense that he was mentally disturbed, but this was immediately dismissed and he got life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years.
Okay, so we all know the phrase knocking on wood, right? Well, did you know the disturbing truth behind it? If not, you're about to find out and you're never going to knock on wood again. Okay, knocking on wood is a tradition of literally touching, tapping, or knocking on wood after somebody says they're doing something or intending to do so, in order to avoid a tempting fate after making a favorable prediction or boast, or the hopes of somebody's death. But realistically, knocking on wood is extremely demonic. When you knock on wood, you're just begging a spirit to come and help you with whatever you wanted. Just listen to this priest explain it and promise me you're never going to knock on wood again.
Our lives. I haven't mentioned the practice of knocking on wood. Don't raise your hand. Has anybody ever knocked on wood? Do you know where the practice comes from? It's a druid practice believing that spirits live in the trees. So when you knock on wood, you're asking the spirit that lives in the tree to come to your aid and to grant your request. Now, if you've ever done that, I'm not saying you're possessed, so don't worry about that. But I just share that as an example of how things that have to do with the occult can become so mainstream.
This prison guard fell in love with this inmate and then they escaped together. 40-year-old Casey White had a 75-year sentence for attempted murder, robbery, and was awaiting a murder trial in Alabama. But throughout his time in jail, prison guard 56-year-old Vicky White had an ongoing 2-year relationship with Casey. And not only were they secretly in a relationship, but they had been plotting how to escape together. At this point, Vicky was a supervisor and had worked at the jail for over 25 years, so everyone was shocked when they found out what she did. So on April 29th, 2022, Vicky managed to sneak out of the jail with Casey. She told the other guards that she was taking Casey for a mental health evaluation when she was seen taking him out of his cell, but that appointment didn't exist. Casey and Vicky were on the run for 11 days in total. And on May 9th, police finally found them, and after a long car chase, Vicky took her own life. Investigators found 1,100 phone calls between them and realized that Casey made Vicky believe that he loved her and basically told her everything she wanted to hear. But when Casey was arrested again, he admitted that he had no real intentions with Vicky and that if they managed to escape, he was going to kill her.
Okay, so I'm about to blow your mind with this video. We all know how many people believe Antarctica is not a continent of ice, but rather a giant ice wall surrounding all the continents of the world, and many people believe that if we cross these ice walls, there would be many other continents that have been kept hidden from us. Well, I'm about to show you a couple maps that actually show all the continents being surrounded by an ice wall. Up first is a map from Gleason's new Standard of the World map. And as you can see, it clearly shows an ice wall surrounding all the continents. This was also published in 1892 and Antarctica was found in 1820, which means they definitely had a better understanding of Antarctica because they literally found it 70 years before this map was published. So the real question is, why is it different today? But that's not even the craziest map. Here is the next map, which was leaked from an unknown source, and it's unbelievable. The ice wall is surrounding the continents and extends out to what looks like a bunch of other continents. And oceans, which means other creatures or humanoids are there that are being hidden from us. Let's say this is real. Why is it being hidden from us? Is it for our safety, or is it being hidden for some other sinister reason? I'm very curious to see what everyone thinks about this, so let me know. If you swim in this, you will die.
100% fatality rate. Every motherfucker who ended up in there has died.
You may not believe it, but this guy is 100% correct. Falling into this is basically a death sentence. This TikTok went viral recently of a guy exploring this dam and explaining how every single person that fell into it died. You might be looking at this and thinking, wow, I could definitely swim in this easily. But I'm here to tell you, you can't. You literally have no chance of surviving swimming in this. This dam is located in Pennsylvania and it's known as the Dock Street Dam. And since 1935, it's taken the lives of 30 people. Granted, this water is not moving very quickly, so it has the illusion of appearing safe. But the way that this wall is built right here is what makes it so deadly. This dam is known as something called a low-head dam. And low-head dams create something known as backwash, which is basically like a washing machine. And if you fall into the water, you're gonna go around in circles until you eventually end up drowning and dying. Backwash is extremely difficult to get out of, so the best course of action here is to stay out of the water. So if you ever see this dam or a dam like it, never go into it.
This musician is one of the worst pedophiles in American history. Meet Carl Logan, a guitar player from Pennsylvania. From 1994 to 2018, Carl Logan was one of the members of the heavy metal band Manowar. He was recognized worldwide for his intense ability to play guitar, and the band Manowar was very popular, selling out shows across the world. Carl Logan was actually such a well-respected guitar player that he ended up selling custom guitars on the band's website, and he even offered a limited number of spots to teach guitar lessons over Skype. But there's a reason why Carl Logan isn't in the band Manowar to this day. On August 9th, 2018, Carl Logan was arrested in North Carolina for allegedly possessing CP or CSAM and was charged with 6 counts of third-degree exploitation of a minor. According to the authorities, Carl was in possession of a number of disturbing videos. These videos depicted young girls from the ages of 4 to 12 years old engaging in explicit acts with a number of unidentified men. Now, in a federal courtroom, Carl actually admitted that he had downloaded the content and kept it in his possession. And in July of 2022, he was sentenced to only 5.5 years in prison. That means that right now he only has to serve a couple more years in prison before he's going to be released back into the general population. This story is just incredibly disturbing. It goes to show that even people in the limelight, the public spotlight, can do some of the darkest things imaginable. And with cases like this, I always wonder, did they catch the guys who created this content? Where was it coming from? And it's even more disturbing to think about how much of that disgusting shit exists on the internet right now.
Man hired a hitman to kill his wife, but she ended up killing the hitman with her bare hands. On September the 6th, 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen had had a busy shift as an A&E nurse. As she got back to her home in southeast Portland, she saw that a note had been left for her from her husband, Mike. The pair had been married for 18 years, and he left the note to say that he was off to the beach. The 51-year-old then went upstairs when she was met with a terrifying attack. A stranger was hiding behind her door and jumped out and started attacking her with a hammer. Susan had no idea this man was Edward Haffey, who was a hitman hired by her husband to kill her. The 59-year-old criminal had been paid $50,000 to kill Susan. Luckily, due to her training as an A&E nurse, Susan was no stranger to self-defense. She dived at the man, tackling him against the wall. She described her adrenaline going into overdrive, and she knew this was a fight for her life. She wrestled the hammer off him and struck him in the head. She screamed at him, asking who sent him, but he wouldn't reply. She ended up grabbing him by the throat and strangling him. She then describes panicking and running to try and escape. However, as she tried to flee the house, Edward grabbed her again and started punching her in the face. She decided to bite him in the arm in case she died so that he would be linked to the crime. Luckily though, she managed to get him in a chokehold and eventually he went floppy. She grabbed the hammer and ran to her neighbour's house. It was there that she rang police, and obviously when they arrived at her house, they found the body of Edward Haffey. Police also discovered his daily planner, and in it was a note saying call Mike and Susan's husband's phone number. It transpired that the two knew each other and they were actually colleagues. A week after the attempted murder, police found Mike hiding out in Oregon. The next day, Susan filed for divorce. In 2007, Michael pleaded guilty to soliciting a murder-for-hire plot against his wife. Shockingly, he was only given 7 years in prison.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This man was found dead, wrapped inside a rug, and police believe there was no foul play involved. Husband and father of 5, Nathan Millard was on a business trip in Baton Rouge, Louisiana when he disappeared. It was the 22nd of February 2023, and he'd been to watch a basketball game, FaceTimed his wife, and then went to Happy's Irish pub with a client. He was seen leaving the pub after 11 p.m. and was spotted on CCTV from a nearby business at 4:30 a.m. He was seen walking down the road with an unidentified person. Prior to vanishing, he was seen at the Greyhound bus station by a security guard. The security guard asked him if he was okay and if he needed help, and Nathan said he'd lost his phone. The security guard offered him a lift, but he declined. He then walked away from the bus station with the unidentified man. Between 11:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m, police say the man Nathan was with introduced him to some other people. They apparently flagged down a substance dealer called Derek Perkins. Nathan then got into a blue Toyota with Derek and a woman. At 4:24 a.m, Nathan is seen alive on surveillance at a Circle K. At some point after this, witnesses told police that Nathan died of an overdose at a home in East Washington Street. Obviously not being aware of this, at 9 a.m, Nathan's client called police to request a welfare check on him after he didn't turn up to a meeting. That day, Nathan's phone and wallet were found several blocks from his hotel. At 11 a.m. that day, Nathan's card was used by Derek. Now, a member of the public reported smelling a foul odour coming from behind a funeral home. This caused police to head over there and discover Nathan's body. He was wrapped in plastic and a rug, and police believe this to have been done by Derek. Strangely, an autopsy report showed that there were no internal or external signs of trauma, and this led police to state that there was no foul play involved. However, police have obtained phone records from Derek which link him to the Circle K where Nathan was last seen alive. The records also link him to the place where Nathan was found. On March the 13th, police were notified of a vehicle fire. The car was a light blue Toyota, matching the description of the one linked to this case. A cadaver dog searched the vehicle and gave a positive alert to the boot of the car. This indicates that there had been a dead body in the boot of the car. At Derek's home, police also found a roll of plastic sheeting consistent with the plastic used to wrap up Nathan's body. Derek has been charged with unlawful disposal of remains, criminal damage to property, obstruction of justice, and failure to seek assistance. Police are also looking for 2 women in connection to this case, and Nathan's death has been ruled an accident. This family's doorbell rang on Christmas Eve. What happened next was just about as horrific as you could ever imagine. This is the case of the Santa Claus killer. It was Christmas Eve 2008, and the Ortega family were excited to celebrate. They lived in Covina in California in a quiet neighborhood. Joseph and Alice Ortega had a fairly big family with 5 adult children and also some grandchildren. They'd invited them all round on the day in question. The festivities were in full swing and the family were playing a big game of poker. However, at 11:30 p.m, suddenly the doorbell rang. All hell was about to break loose. Stood at the door was a man dressed in a Santa costume. It wasn't long before police got frantic calls from neighbours. They shrieked, "Come immediately, they're burning down someone's house." Others reported hearing gunfire. An officer described what they found at the scene as being apocalyptic. Bruce Pardo was the man that arrived at the house at that fateful evening. In 2004, he'd met his future wife, Sylvia, who was the adult daughter of the Ortegas. They married 2 years later, but due to financial issues, they did separate. Sylvia had 3 children from a previous relationship, and there is speculation that Bruce may have lied about having a child from another woman. In 2008, Bruce was ordered to pay spousal support, and he apparently told his friends he felt his ex was taking him to the cleaners. To make matters worse, Bruce was then sacked from his job. The divorce was finalised just a week before the horrific violence that would occur. He showed up to his former in-laws' house that evening dressed as Santa. 8-year-old Katrina answered the door and he immediately opened fire. He shot the little girl and started spraying bullets at all of the other family members inside. With him, he actually had a gift-wrapped package, which was a homemade flamethrower. He used it to set the house on fire. Bruce's ex-wife, her parents, her 2 brothers and their wives, her sister and her nephew were all killed. Luckily, some did manage to escape to a neighbour's house. These were Sylvia's sister Letitia, her husband and Sylvia's 8-year-old daughter. Meanwhile, Bruce escaped in a rental car. He actually had an escape plan and he had on him a plane ticket and also cash. However, during the incident, he had sustained 3rd-degree burns, so he decided to drive to his brother's house instead. His brother came home from a Christmas party that day to find a horrendous scene himself. He was met by the body of his brother on the floor in a pool of blood with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In Bruce's car, they found the Santa costume, which had been booby-trapped. It was due to set off 200 rounds of ammunition and set fire. The car did actually explode, but luckily no one was hurt. Letitia and her husband took in Sylvia's daughter and have worked hard to help her come to terms with what happened. Letitia has also really tried her best to make sure that Christmas remains a happy, special occasion.
These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this one is just gut-turning. This was 27-year-old Roy Jaggers. He was a fun person who liked to do a lot of things, and everybody adored him. But he would occasionally babysit for one of his neighbors, and this is what led to all of this. She is 27-year-old Heather Pate, who you see on the screen right now. So she got the idea that Roy was hurting one of her children, but this was never proven. Roy's mother even said that she knows her boy, and he would never do this. But in Heather's head, she believed it, and she was going to take care of it herself. And at 6:23 a.m. on August 21st, 2021, 911 was called, and somebody reported a dead body at the bottom of a cliff. They were able to identify the body off fingerprints, and it was 27-year-old Roy Jaggers. And he appeared to be absolutely mangled. And this is what happened. Heather lured Roy to her house, and waiting for him there was Heather and her 37-year-old boyfriend named Kevin. And the two of them then started beating Roy extremely bad in front of her children. They then handcuffed him and threw him in a vehicle and then met up with Heather's ex-boyfriend, who was 37-year-old named Brad. The three of them then brought him to this wasteland of a desert right here, and they then started torturing Roy for hours on end. They used a blowtorch on him, which burned a lot of his flesh, as well as continuing beating him, and they then started hitting him with an axe, which just absolutely mangled him. And the worst part about this is, he was still alive throughout all of this. They then loaded him back up in the vehicle and drove him 25 miles away to a place called Cathedral Canyon. And they were not done yet. They then forced him to the edge of a cliff. They forced him to take off all of his clothing and then gave him no other choice other than walk off the cliff. Roy Jaggers then walked off the cliff and landed in the canyon below. And the sad and disgusting thing is, he still wasn't dead. The three of them then went down to his body, and Brad pulled out a gun and fired several shots into his body, which finally ended up killing Roy Jaggers. Within 36 hours, the three disgusting human beings that did this were arrested. They were all charged with the murder of Roy Jaggers, and they are actively seeking the death penalty for Brad, since he fired the killing bullets. Heather was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, and Kevin was sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. The fact that these people actually have a chance to get out of prison before they die, especially because they made an innocent man walk off a cliff in an attempt to kill him. Can you imagine being in the position that Roy Jaggers was in? Being brutally beaten and then taken to a desert to be burned and beaten even more. And then the people that are doing this to you make you walk off a cliff. I honestly can't imagine what Roy was going through, and I feel so bad for him and his family. May Roy Jaggers rest in peace.
This is James Henry Hammond, an American politician and one of the worst pedophiles in U.S. history. This story is absolutely sick and disgusting. So James Henry Hammond was born in the year 1807 in South Carolina. So before we get into the essay that happened and his pedophilia, we have to talk about James's pro-slavery stance. So James was the governor of South Carolina from 1842 until 1844. And he was elected to the U.S. Senate from 1857 to 1860. James was a Democrat and popularized the phrase, "Cotton is king." These are some quotes from James. You can read these and pause them. They're absolutely horrific. Throughout his life, he owned over 300 slaves, and he treated them absolutely horribly. So if you think the story can't get worse, it definitely does. Through marriage, James was related to this guy, Wade Hampton II. He was a famous soldier in the War of 1812, and he was a stand-up guy. James's sister-in-law, Anne Fitzsimmons, was married to Wade. But eventually, Wade would learn about the dark things James was doing with his daughters. As it turns out, James Henry Hammond had SA'd all 4 of Wade's daughters. Yes, James assaulted 4 of his nieces who were all teenagers at the time. So when Wade learned about this, he obviously made this public. This was a massive scandal at the time because James Henry Hammond was the governor of South Carolina, but it didn't matter. Nothing happened to him, and eventually he was elected to the Senate. James's own wife would leave him eventually because he was SAing his own slaves. He assaulted one of his slaves, Sally, when she was 18 years old. and he assaulted her own daughter, Louisa, when she was only 12. So if you can't tell by now, James was obviously a piece of shit. And another sad thing to come out of the story was that James's own nieces, who he essayed when they were teenagers, never got married because their social prospects were destroyed by the scandal. Yeah, this meant that James was able to go on to the Senate after he served as the governor when the scandal broke, and his own nieces were left for nothing. Now let's fast forward to the 1900s and the 1980s specifically, when his diaries, Secret and Sacred, were published. Yes, James Henry Hammond wrote all these things down in his personal diary. When describing the assault of his own teenage nieces, this is what James Henry Hammond wrote down. Warning, this is disturbing. He wrote, "Here were 4 lovely creatures, each contending for my love, claiming the greater share of it as due to her superior devotion to me, all of them rushing on every occasion into my arms and covering me with kisses, lolling on my lap, pressing their bodies almost into mine, wreathing their limbs with mine, encountering warmly every portion of my frame and permitting my hands to stray unchecked over every part of them and to rest without the slightest shrinking from it, in the most secret and sacred regions, and all this for a period of more than 2 years continuously." These are his own teenage nieces this politician was talking about. And to this day, this school in South Carolina is named after him. It is a pre-K through 12th grade school named the Hammond School. Absolutely disgusting. Follow for part 3 of the series. This is one of the most disturbed killers in American history, and you probably don't know his story. This is Maxim Gelman, the 2011 spree killer from New York City, and his crime spree sent shockwaves throughout all of America. All this began on February 11th, 2011, when Maxim stabbed his stepfather, Alexander, over 55 times to death. His mother was home at the time, and he spared her, but he stole her car and sped off with it. If you want to hear all of the reasons why Maxim committed these murders and his crazy methodology behind all of it, you can listen to my wife and I's podcast, Murder in America, on all streaming platforms. It's our latest episode. After stabbing his stepfather, Maxim took off, and he was on a path of revenge. Maxim at the time thought that he was being trailed by government agencies and that he was a wanted man, but the reality of it was that he wasn't. He even stated that he wanted to take down rats, but there were no rats that were testifying against him. Maxim then visited the house of a girl he knew, Yelena Bolchenko. When he found that Yelena wasn't there, he stabbed her mother, Anna, there to death. After murdering Yelena's mom, Anna, he left the crime scene. He hid out for a few hours, but he returned at 4:00 p.m. that day. And when he returned, he found Yelena, Anna's daughter, standing outside on the phone. He then got out of his car, confronted Yelena. She took off running, but he chased her down and stabbed her 11 times in broad daylight in front of a bunch of onlookers. Maxim then sped away from the crime scene in the stolen car, crashed into another car, stabbed the driver of that car 3 times, and hijacked that vehicle. Later on, while Maxim was speeding through the streets of New York, he hit 62-year-old Stephen Tenenbaum. Stephen had just been crossing the street. Maxim struck the pedestrian, and eventually he sadly died of his injuries. But it was at this point when Maxim decided that he wanted to enact his full plan. He wanted to hijack a New York City subway car. And let me tell you, when you get into the details of these crimes, it is absolutely insane how this guy thought about all of it. But again, listen to the podcast, you get the whole story. So at this point, Maxim gets onto a subway car in New York City, and he's headed to the most busy part of the city. And this guy is armed and dangerous. His face is plastered across all of New York City's newspapers and their news. And people are on the lookout for him. All the NYPD knows that Maxim Gelman is a threat to public safety. And that's when Maxim runs into this guy, Joe Lozito. Apparently, Maxim was hopping train to train, and he had been banging on doorways of the subways trying to be let in. And 2 cops had even seen Maxim at the door and had refused to let him in, but they knew that it was Maxim. Eventually, Maxim got into one of these trains, and that's when he confronted Joe. Maxim ended up stabbing Joe a number of times in the face and in the back of the head. But eventually, Joe was the hero, and he was the one that was able to bring Maxim Gelman down to the ground without the assistance of the New York Police Department. The New York Police Department lied and stated that they were the ones that took Gelman down. But Joe was the one who took the killer down all along. On the latest episode of our show about this crime, we actually interviewed Joe Lozito, heard his side of the story, and wow, does he drop some bombshells. Just search Murder in America on any streaming platform and you'll find our podcast.